30 miles an hour is probably a conservative estimate of the speed of a charging grizzly. 40 might be too high. Pace off 30 feet on your front lawn. Imagine a 700-pound bear covering it at 40 miles an hour, and you'll have the picture. Spencer Rumpel, the Moose Whisperer, bringing you exciting hunting and outdoor adventure stories from around the world. Today's story is a very, very exciting and famous story as told by Ben East in 1940 in the Rocky Mountains of Alberta, Canada. So, without further ado, let's get right into it. If you have any doubts that the roar of a bear under those conditions has the power to turn your blood to water, you might take a jaunt out to Jasper Park in Alberta and have a chat with Harry Phillips. Harry, you see, is in what most folks would consider a position of undisputed authority. He not only knows what a wounded grizzly sounds like at the start of his charge, he knows what follows. He knows the feel of teeth and claws and the smell of a bear's breath when it's been feeding on carrion for a month. Not that the knowledge in itself is especially novel. Plenty of men have acquired it in the long history of encounters between grizzlies and hunters. But most of them paid with their lives for the knowing. And of those who didn't, I doubt whether any had a closer call than Harry. He came about as near to glory at the hands of an infuriated bear as it is possible to come and live to tell the story. Harry Phillips was one of a party of 6 camped at the North Fork of the north boundary of Jasper National Park, Alberta, 4 days out from the town of Jasper. The hunters were A.W. Buck and Fred Robinson, sportsmen from St. Louis. Harry Phillips and Herschel Neighbor were guiding, both unarmed. The game regulations of Alberta do not permit licensed guides to carry firearms while handling hunters. A cook and a wrangler filled out the party. The time was late September. Snow came in the night, the first of the year, a wet fall of about 8 inches. And the men rolled out of their sleeping bags in the morning to find the trees bowed over. Buck, with plenty of experience in the mountain hunting, called off his plans for the day. Robinson, less seasoned, was restless to stir out. He voted to have a try for sheep. There was likely country about 3 miles from camp. Snow means good sheep hunting and makes it easy to spot tracks and animals alike. Buck was reluctant to have any of the party go out. The horses would have tough going and there'd be danger of a bad fall, no matter how sure-footed the animals might be. But his partner was eager for the sheep hunt. Buck didn't want to cramp anyone's fun, so he gave in, and Robinson started off with Harry Phillips guiding. Halfway to the sheep country, the two made a find. They stumbled onto the carcass of a big caribou, apparently killed by hunters earlier in the fall. It was all picked over and clean, and the signs showed plainly that a grizzly had done the picking. Most exciting of all, the fresh tracks of the bear led away from the caribou on the new snow. Well, Robinson was ready to quit sheep hunting then and there. It was a grizzly that he wanted, and he was all for taking the track. But Harry talked him out of it. The bear's probably 10 miles from here by now, the guide explained. But the Bighorn Range yielded nothing, and in the early afternoon, the two men rode back to the caribou bones. Robinson still wanted to try for the bear, and Harry gave in. The tracks are going towards camp, he agreed. We'll follow for a while anyways. They tied the horses and took to the grizzly's trail afoot. The hunt was surprisingly short. They had traveled no more than a quarter of an hour when a big yellow-brown bear reared up in the bush ahead of them. He sat erect on his haunches, his forepaws hanging down, his great head swinging from side to side as he tested the wind for definite news of the danger that was following him. Robinson smashed a shot at him, and the bear went down on all fours and ran. When the men came up on the track, they found the grizzly was dragging a shattered foot. The hunt began to take on a slightly different tone from that point. Both men knew the price of carelessness, for it's the trick of a wounded grizzly to double back on his track and ambush his pursuers. Phillips knew, too, the added chance he took in carrying no rifle. They followed the bear around the side of a mountain, and finally Harry called a brief halt. "We're getting pretty far away from the horses," he explained. "I'll go back and bring them up. You can follow the bear, but take it easy and be careful. Remember, a crippled silvertip is bad medicine at close quarters." He turned back and Robinson went on alone, working slowly. For a second time then, the grizzly showed himself, moving through brush on the mountain ahead. Robinson placed his shot in the body. It knocked the bear down, sent him sliding and rolling down the slope 50 feet or more. He gathered himself up and was out of sight before Fred could shoot again. From that point on, the track showed heavy bleeding. It developed later that the bullet from Robinson's .35 caliber bolt-action rifle had struck high in the hip and ripped into the abdomen of the grizzly, breaking no bones but inflicting a wound from which the animal would have died, finally of hemorrhage. Robinson trailed slowly after that to give Phillips a chance to overtake him. A half-mile further along, he came to the edge of a thick windfall, stopped for a moment, and something in motion along the far edge of the windfall caught his eye. It was the head of the grizzly. The bear was walking along the side of a log jam, carrying his head high. Robinson could see the big, broad skull plainly. There was a chance for a headshot. Robinson weighed the odds in his mind. He recalled bear talk he had heard from the previous autumn in the Jackson Hole country. A veteran guide had warned that a wounded grizzly bear is likely to charge if overtaken in an open spot, where he can come downhill or across clear ground. There's not much chance he'll try it uphill or through tangles. This was decidedly not open ground. All the same, the bear was uncomfortably close. Robinson decided to wait for a better chance. He backed away from the windfall, picked an open spot, and waited for the guide to return. Phillips came up within a few minutes. Robinson told him what had happened and said he believed the bear was badly hurt and was trying to locate them by scent. The rest of the hunt, the two men agreed, was going to call for plenty of caution to avert disaster. They moved carefully around the windfall, picked up the tracks of the grizzly leading away from the other side, called another halt for several minutes while they discussed the situation. When they took up the trail again, it was with both men well on the uphill side of the tracks, Robinson above Phillips. The guide repeated his warning that the bear might watch his back track, lying in wait for them. The atmosphere of the hunt was growing decidedly electric. "I'll stay down where I can see the tracks. You stay where you can see me," Harry instructed. Within 50 yards, they came across a windfall that blocked their way and made it necessary for both men to swing down onto the beat trail to go around the jam. They arrived together where the lower tip of the windfall ended in a thick clump of young spruce growing out of a mountainside at an angle. The branches grew clear to the ground. Phillips started to go around the thick tangle. Robinson, unwilling to let the unarmed guide take the lead, scrambled up beside him, turned half sideways to force his way between the branches and Harry, and just ahead of them, not more than 30 feet away, the roar of an enraged bear exploded like a bomb of sound. 30 miles an hour is probably a conservative estimate of the speed of a charging grizzly. 40 might be too high. Pace off 30 feet on your front lawn. Imagine a 700-pound bear covering it at 40 miles an hour, and you'll have the picture. Robinson shot from his side, with the stock of his rifle still mucked under his arm, with no time to bring it up. The soft-nosed, copper-jacketed bullet of the .35 caliber rifle weighs 200 grains. It leaves the muzzle at a velocity of 2,180 feet per second. At 20 feet, it delivers a jabbing, jolting, paralyzing wallop of better than 2,000 foot-pounds. That's enough to lift a ton more than 1 foot off the ground. The grizzly absorbed that blow and never flinched. Robinson didn't even know his shot had hit the bear. Later, he learned that the slug had struck the bridge of the grizzly's nose 2 or 3 inches below the crossline of the eyes, mushroomed, according to formula, gone literally down the bear's throat, and expended the rest of its momentum in the chest. 4 inches higher, and the target would have dropped the grizzly stone dead in its tracks. The bear came on without faltering, snarling and snapping from side to side like a mad dog. He did not rear up, but struck as a bull strikes, charging into men full tilt. It was Phillips he had seen and was after. But the men were standing only a couple of feet apart, and he smashed into both of them. His shoulder, or the side of his body, hit Robinson and sent him sprawling back, clear out of the spruce clump. The hunter landed, by no means gently, in a sitting position 10 or a dozen feet away. Through the rest of the fracas, he escaped all attention from the bear. It was Phillips the grizzly was determined to finish off. When Robinson regained his feet, the bear and Harry had slid 8 or 10 yards down the side of the mountain. The grizzly was standing over the man, tearing at him, and in the back of Robinson's mind, Phillips' one unearthly yell was still ringing. That one scream was all he heard from Harry. In fact, it was all that Harry had been capable of. But if Fred Robinson lives to be a very old man, he stands little chance of ever forgetting it. More than one big game hunter speculating on the sensations of a man mauled to death by one of the large carnivores has voiced a belief that a merciful coma sets in the outset of the attack. That the nerve shock serves as a powerful drug, a sedative that dulls the senses to pain and fear alike, making death an easy one. Maybe so. Or maybe the breath that was knocked out of Harry Phillips when he went down under the impact of the bear's charge. Anyway, all he was able to recall afterwards was hazy thoughts, to the effect that maybe the bear would leave him for dead if he did not move. Robinson scrambled to his feet with that one scream loud in his ears and looked around for his rifle to finish off the affair. The rifle was gone. It had flown out of Fred's hands when the bear knocked him down. In the tangle of fallen timber, the rock and spruce, with half a foot of snow on the ground, the chances were all against finding the rifle soon. And unless it was found very soon, it wouldn't do any good. What Robinson did next, he didn't talk about for quite some time. He had been home weeks before he finally sketched this part of the story to Buck. And then it was with the apologetic remark that he didn't expect or want anyone to believe him. There was Phillips and the grizzly 20 or 30 feet away down the side of the mountain, with the bear tearing at the man. There was only one thing to do, and Robinson did it by instinct, not by reason. He reached back and unsnapped the leather loop around the handle of his hunting knife. Something in the back of his mind told him that if he ran down and struck the knife into the bear's side, the grizzly would turn his attention from Harry. "I didn't do it because of bravery," he told Buck afterward, scoffing at his own solution. "I did it because I had to do something." He started down for the bear, freeing the knife as he went, but before he had it clear of the sheath, the picture changed again. Running those few paces down the slope toward the bear, Fred saw his rifle. The grizzly was standing on it, on the barrel, with one hind foot. The stock was sticking out from under the foot in a crazy angle. The rifle looked all right. In fact, it looked a deal better than that. Fred didn't want to wait to see whether it had been damaged. He grabbed at it and yanked it out from under the bear's foot. Quarters were pretty close by that time. The bear must have felt the movement under his foot. He dropped the business of finishing off Phillips, raised his head, and looked over his shoulder at the newcomer. He was a sight Fred Robinson wouldn't likely to forget for quite some time. He had been mauling Harry about the head, and he had bitten through the guide's felt hat. When he looked up at Fred, he was clomping his foam and blood-flecked jaws on the hat and trying to rid himself of the thing. It was plain that he wanted to clear the decks for further action. Had Robinson pumped another shell into the chamber of the rifle after that frenzied snapshot as the bear charged? He couldn't remember. Had he replaced the magazine, any of the shells that he had used? He didn't remember that either. Was the gun empty in either the chamber or magazine or both? He didn't know. At the moment, he had just one idea: to hold the muzzle of the rifle to the bear's head and snap the trigger. Robinson guessed afterwards that the front sight of his rifle was 4 feet from the head of the grizzly when he squeezed off the trigger. The estimate is probably a generous one. The 200-grain slug struck just under the ear, and the bear went down as if hit by a lightning bolt, stone dead in his tracks. Guess what? Harry lay under the bear, silent and inert. Fred rubbed snow on his face and worked over him for a couple of minutes, breathing a sigh of relief when the guide moved. Flicked back to half-consciousness. Not that Harry's predicament was ended by any means. In the first place, the bear was laying squarely on top of him, and the bear weighed a conservative estimate of 700 pounds. The pelt later measured 8 feet 1 inch from tip to tip, 8 feet 5 inches across, which gives you an idea. Besides, the guide was horribly mauled. The bear had bitten through the thick flesh on the inside of one leg, bitten the full length of his great fangs. He had driven the claws of his sound forefoot deep into the other leg, between one knee and the hip, tearing loose thick ribbons of flesh that hung down like tattered bloody rags. Sometime in the fracas, Harry must have reached up with his right hand in a desperate effort to fend off the grizzly's attack. For his pains, the bear had bitten the index finger nearly off at the second joint, leaving it dangling by a thread of tendon. The guide's head was in the worst shape of all. The grizzly had had Harry's whole head between his jaws, and the lower fangs went into the forehead just over the right eye, missing the arch of the eye by no more than 1/4 of an inch. To that margin, Phillips probably owes his life. The smooth round bone of the skull gave the bear no purchase for his powerful jaws. Could he have driven his fangs into the orbit of the eye, his chances of crushing the bone would have been far better. Meanwhile, his upper fangs had cut into the scalp above the forehead on the left side, gone to the bone and inflicted a slash 3 or 4 inches long. Were the grizzly's powerful jaw muscles weakened by the shot that smashed into the bridge of his nose? Is Harry alive because the bear was prevented by wounds from exerting the full might of his great fang-studded jaws? Harry himself and Robinson and Buck say yes. Save for that earlier shot, unlucky as it seemed at the time, Phillips would have died there under the grizzly before Fred found and retrieved his rifle. They believe. Robinson went to work to free Harry from his place under the dead bear. Try as he would, he could not roll the bear off the man or move it enough to free any part of Phillips. Finally, he managed to work 1 foot out. The grizzly was lying squarely on the other leg. Fred braced his feet against the bear's side and tugged at Harry's shoulders. Little by little, he pulled the guide free. But the second foot came out from beneath the grizzly, minus the boot and sock. Harry was still conscious, but he lacked the strength to stand. Fred proceeded to dress his cuts, and as best he could there on the mountain. First, he cut off the finger that dangled by a cord. He hastily disinfected the claw and fang wounds, using a small bottle of disinfectant that he carried with him in his pocket. The worst of the bleeding then began to slow. And now they had the dread trek down the mountains and across the valley to the horses. Robinson had little hope that they would reach the horses with Harry still alive, that either animal would let him lift the guide into the saddle, reeking as he did of blood and bear, or that Phillips could endure the ride back to camp once he was in the saddle, even if he could get there. But they plodded on, a few yards at a time. When Harry grew sick and fainted and wanted to give up, Robinson spurred him by compliments that he could never hope to reach camp alone without the guide, with evening coming on so rapidly he needed him. They made it to the horses finally. Harry's mount, a wise, patient old cow pony, looked him over, sniffed the bear scent, and stood quiet, as if it knew what all had happened. Buck commented later that this was the most unusual thing that he had ever known a horse to do. The average saddle animal fears bear smell as it fears death. They rode into camp at dusk, with Phillips half lying across the saddle horn, shaking in the cold, all but frozen in his bloody, sweat-drenched clothing, barely able to whisper "bear" when Buck asked him what had happened. They laid him on a blanket in the tent, took his clothes off, put hot rocks on his feet, and went to work in earnest on the bear wounds. Picture that scene. There in the snow-bound camp, Buck and Robinson and the cook working by candlelight. They sterilized the cuts one at a time with a powerful antiseptic agent that Buck carried on him. Opening up the wounds, cleaning them, taping the edges together, all the cuts but one, that is. When they finished the job of first aid, an hour before midnight, there was one part of the work left undone. That was the severed finger. When Robinson had cut the dangling tendon there at the scene of the scrap, it had contracted and drawn far back under the skin of the finger stub and hand. With it, it carried inevitable contamination from the carrion foul teeth of the bear. But it was too deep in the flesh to be opened up and cleaned. They started Harry out for Jasper early the next morning with Colin, the wrangler. Herschel Neighbor, the second guide, had left before daybreak to push on ahead. At the Jasper Park boundaries lay a ranger's cabin. From there, Neighbor could phone into town for a doctor and medical supplies to come out and meet the party. Herschel made 28 miles to the ranger's cabin by 4 o'clock that afternoon and put through his call. Colin and Harry did half as well. They made camp in the snow that night. At 3:30 the next afternoon, they reached the cabin. A half hour later, a doctor rode in. All in all, Harry Phillips was 3 nights and 4 days on the trail getting down to the hospital at Jasper. And long before the end of the 4th day, the contamination left on the torn finger tenon by the teeth of the grizzly was doing its work. Harry was delirious from the infected finger when the little train rode into Jasper. It was 6 weeks before Harry saw the outside of a hospital again, and he was still pretty shaky on his feet. By all the rules, he should have been checked out, back there on the North Fork of the Berlin or somewhere on the trail down to Jasper, and he knew it. And ever since, he's always kind of figured that maybe the game laws of Alberta should be changed to let a guide carry a firearm while he's guiding. To which, from the depths of his heart, Fred Robinson echoes a loud and fervent Amen. Those few minutes there on the shoulder of the mountain with Harry down under the bear weren't exactly a lawn party for Fred either. Well, that's his story, folks, but I'd like to tell yours. Send in your hunting or outdoor adventure stories to info@themoosewhisperer.com. You can write it out and email it to me or use a voice memo on your phone and share it the same way. It's darn easy. Just hit record and say, hey, this one time I was hunting and I saw... I know you got great stories to tell. Now let me tell them to the world. If you'd enjoyed this story or you haven't already, please subscribe, like, and consider sharing the video with a friend. Heck, we're starting a community here. Thanks for watching, folks. More stories to come.